talking about data collection, that is a very important issue for us because we operate on development cooperation money. That's taxpayers' money set aside for the Swedish development cooperation budget. So we really have a strong urge to prove what the program is resulting in. So for annual data, we look at things like master and PhD graduations, scientific publications, conference contributions from our partners. The meetings are ranging the number of participants in those meetings. We record the gender distribution among staff and students. We have particular efforts in physics and mathematics in Africa to try to include more women in the program. We look at the relevance of the research results to the SDGs. We look at the environmental impact of the activities. We look at the potential impact and policy influence. We look at the sustainability of the capacity built also, because we operate with long-term funding. It may be 20 or 30 years, but what happens after we leave the group or network, that is something we're following up.
And how do you share this data?
In the annual reports.
Okay.
That are published on our website, and in particular follow-up and evaluation studies that you also can find on the ISB website.
Maybe you send it to me and then I can share it with the participants. It sounds very interesting. When you talk about science, I'm guessing you're talking about the hard sciences.
Yes.
Not social science. Yeah.
I did say we're also looking at PhD student appraisers, because the aim is to build capacity locally, not to build capacity for OECD countries.
Yeah.
And looking at about 400 PhD students graduated over 2008 to 2016, I believe. 96 of them are still active in their countries or home regions.
Okay,
so,
interesting. No, I'd love to see that data. So please share the link and then we can, I'll share it among the participants.
I'll do.
Yeah, I also wanted to share with you within the Lisa's and my project here at NI, and within our efforts to in the future focus more on higher education research. We have come out with a policy note authored by me, and it just came out this week. So I'm doing this as a soft launch now when I have all of you gathered here. So I'll also share a link if you're interested, and you can please spread it as well. And I thought at this point we'd just move into the discussion. We'd do the same setup as we did before the break, that if you want to say something, you write your name or you write a question in the chat, and then I'll take you in order. Let's see. At this point, nobody's on the speakers list. Okay, Lisa is there. Lisa, over to you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for everybody for very interesting presentations. I have a general question related to the data, because it really has been a struggle for us to get some kind of comparable data, as Kaisa explained in the beginning. And I think that one of the reasons might be that there is a kind of fear of evaluations and rankings and performance monitoring, that maybe some universities are not willing to release that kind of data because they think that somebody is going to make comparisons which are not positive for them. I don't know whether that's true, but in any case, this issue of rankings related to data is a tricky one, And I think that in one way or another, it might relate also to the discussion on decolonization, that what kind of issues we are monitoring and what kind of knowledge, comparable knowledge is significant and important. And I would like to see, maybe this is also an issue for Association of African Universities and UNESCO, because it might be that there is potential, or there could be possibilities for the universities to look together at issues which really are relevant and important for the performance of African universities without this kind of international ranking pressure for international rankings. And related to education, for instance, we know at the moment already that degree education is perhaps not going to be as important as it has used to be. There is more and more debates on lifelong learning, studies for professionals who are already working, or need to learn new skills in order to adapt to the demands of the labor markets, etc. So maybe some kind of knowledge about modules or courses instead of degrees could be something that the universities could collect. And then, well, and that of course also relates to the resources, because like from Uganda, Makerere, I think that they already are providing quite a lot of courses or teaching for fee-paying or marketized kind of study modules for students who are paying fees, and these are becoming more and more important for the resources of the universities. I don't know how this situation is in general for the universities, but there is this tension that how you marketize teaching. I mean, what kind of packages you offer, etc. So the degrees are maybe not so important as they used to be. And then on research, what is the kind of policy relevant research? What is the significance of African publishers, for instance? If we are looking at Web of Science and international research output databases, they are of course very much dominated by Western science or strong research nations. So could there be some kind of some other measurements related to the policy relevance and intra-African collaboration, for instance? Just some thoughts. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Lisa. Those were a lot of thoughts, but maybe before we go into discussing them, I saw Francois had a question for Peter. Do you want to ask him?
Sure. Well, I mean, my question actually relates to what Lisa was saying and to what Peter was saying. So I'll try and deal with both. Maybe just to respond to Lisa's first comment about the issue of as your data becomes more transparent, you may be less inclined to share as the reality on the ground becomes clearer to you might call them your competitors, and that's certainly happening in Africa. You can't say so much, Nairobi University is the only university in Kenya. There are other up and coming universities, and so there's certainly competition, and this is something that we have to acknowledge. And I can share from our own experience that actually happened. I mean, in the case of University of Nairobi, when the data started to look a little bit scary, the data flows started to dry up. We got a lot decreased levels of participation. But at the same time, a university like Eduardo Mondlane that always fared relatively poorly, and I mean, understandably, because it was quite a new university, saw this as an opportunity for improvement and realistic strategic planning. So I think the difference there was the leadership, was the extent to which the leadership thought that they could use data to steer the university, as opposed to a political picture that they wanted to present, or to defend a particular position, in the case of Nairobi, which is seen as the flagship university and may now be threatened by Kenyatta and others, and say, well, actually, we don't want that to be too widely known. And in the case of Makerere, lots of data, because Makerere was doing quite well and was actually starting to feature in some of the rankings. When they started to do developing country rankings, for example, Makerere would feature. And so for them, there was an incentive to have better data infrastructure, because then they was reporting data to the rankings agencies. And that was in their best interest. I mean, that goes back to incentives again. So I think you're right to point out that we mustn't be too idealistic maybe about, data will just flow and it will solve all the problems. We're going to run into quite serious political issues too, and we need to be mindful of those. My question for Peter was really around not the publications that they've produced as a project, but the publications that they counted as outputs, as success factors. And we ran into this problem with Hirana, and it links again to Lisa's point. We used Web of Science. So all the publications data in our data set is from Web of Science. And this was not ideal. And we had lots of discussions at meetings about whether we should or shouldn't use Web of Science. But the hard reality was the institutions themselves weren't collecting this data. And so Web of Science was a necessary evil in the end. We could at least do some tracking, but we knew it wasn't comprehensive enough. And we did 1 or 2 pilot exercises with the University of Mauritius, where they started self-reporting, and we came up with a structure we used from Web of Science, the same structure, so they could start to count their own publications. And we found that there was 50% of publications that weren't captured. So we were way under reporting. We didn't get as far as to do quality checks, double counting, sometimes reporting in multiple years, the same publication. These kinds of things obviously creep in. We didn't get that far, but I think there's certainly an opportunity there to work more on the publication output side, to come up with a more comprehensive database. And sorry, to go back to my question to Peter, is whether they did anything like this in their project to broaden the representativity of what was being counted as outputs, whether it's PhDs, publications, or other kinds of scientific outputs. Thanks.
When we look at publication output, we collect all the publications directly from our partners. We will then look at the quality by using, as you said, Web of Science. And in general, about 40% of the publication output of our partners are in Web of Science listed journals with the impact factors. So we regard them as quality publications. For the remaining 60%, they may be in obscure journals, or it's difficult sometimes because in mathematics there are a number of quality journals that are actually not found in Web of Science. So it's not 100%, but it might be university journals and other less known journals. But I mean, many African journals are now found in that Web of Science, actually, in our fields. What we particularly look on is publications in journals by predatory publishers using Cabell's blacklist, because this is an increasing problem with increasing demands to publish on open source. I mean, on the internet, on open access, and we always inform our partners if we see that they have been publishing, usually unknowingly, in journals by predatory publishers. I got, just because we are compiling the annual report now, so I was giving feedback to a partner at University of Nairobi who had published in a predatory journal. And she responded that actually recently 18 PhD candidates were denied examination and defense by the University Council because they had publications by in predatory journals in their thesis. So the awareness about this is increasing, which is very good, because this the whole notion of predatory journals is a nuisance, of course.
Thanks.
Thank you very much. And as you say, there are good news. For instance, I think more and more universities also share their graduate thesis in databases, and that's something that could also be led into data collection, and there are positives. But there are also gaps, and I wanted us to discuss the gaps a little bit. For instance, as I said initially, we were interested in breakdowns of students and professors by discipline, and I wanted to ask directly to UNESCO and maybe AAU if there are any sources like that for discipline-wise broken down data. Also, Lisa discussed fee-paying students and their roles. Another type of data I would like to see is the actual cost to the end user or to the student, since more and more universities charge the full cost directly onto the students. What is the cost currently? Do we have data on that? So I wanted to ask if AAU or UNESCO has that type of data, or anyone else knows of that type of data. And then if you want to speak, let me know in the chat. Maybe Nodomo?
Hi, Kaisa. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, please, can you repeat your question?
Yes, sure. So two types of data that I was looking for was breakdown of just number of students and faculty by discipline. If that's something you have, sometimes you can see the total number of students quite easily, but to break it down in different disciplines is hard. And another type of data I would be interested in is the cost to the end user for education, for instance, at state universities in different countries.
Okay. So you want me to broadly comment on that?
I'm trying to kind of circle in the gaps, and that's something that's interesting in my research.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. I think what I've heard from this meeting is it's important that we sort of have a larger agenda in terms of why we are collecting the data, so that it's not just about collecting numbers. We must have a bigger picture, so that then the collection informs, the actual collection is informed by what we want to achieve. For example, when we look at the data that you are trying to collect, and we try and map backwards and say, how can this data be collected? Who actually produces this data? And then it informs the larger process. And also when we share the outcomes or what is emerging in terms of the stories from that, we can then incentivize more people to actually collect that data and also to share it. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, I hear you. I guess we're understanding the data collection more in that sustainable cycle that we discussed in the previous hour. That it's not just about the numbers; it's about how that is used, how that leads to impact, how that incentivizes institutions to keep collecting the data. I think I understand your point. Yusuf, when it comes to that type of data that I was looking for, could I come to Senegal and find it there?
If you want to find this detailed data for your study, you have to be directly in contact with the Ministry of Higher Education. And also, I think that there's where you can find all the data on the higher education in Senegal. But for UNESCO, our methodology has two main anchorpoints: is the data collected by our Institute of Statistics, UIS, and then you can also take a look on the GEM report publicated every year.
Thank you.
The GEM report, yeah.
That's helpful. Maybe can you share the
link? Monitor.
Sure.
Okay.
Could you share the link with me, and then I can share it with the rest?
Yes, I will share the link for iOS platform.
We have the same page already, but the report you mentioned, please share a link for the latest one, and I can share it with the rest. I thought it was interesting also how Lisa discussed the disincentive of sharing data, especially when it becomes more current and comparable. And I thought it was interesting, Francois' comment on that. So that's maybe also something to keep in mind in our project. My colleague Michael has been helping me to look at annual reports, and we started with Herana universities. Just thought that it was interesting that most of them would not share their annual reports on the website, at least not so that we could find it easily. And if they share, they often would only share the latest one, so you cannot kind of go back and compare data over time also. Francois had a comment, but Jennifer was first.
Hi, yeah, mine was to your question to Nadumo, and it was just around some of these, some of the types of data that you mentioned sounded quite similar to what we were looking at in the demographics of faculty work as well. And I know that, to Nadumo's point, that we have to be clear on the agenda, I guess, because we were working quite closely with the NCTE, we had a common agenda and objective for what we wanted to use the data for. They were able to give us, to kind of give us access to that data. And I was just going to ask Nadumo if they still collect that type of data, so around the number of students by discipline, faculty by discipline. I know that they used to, I think it was annually, they used to collect summary statistics from a range of universities in Ghana. And Nadumo, it's just whether they're still doing that, because I think that's the type of data that Kaiser, you were asking for.
Yeah, they do collect it. They collect it annually. Of course, sometimes there are delays in terms of the turning in of the data by universities, but yes, they do collect it.
Yeah, so I guess kind of to answer your question, that data is available specifically in Ghana with NCTE, and that's some of the data that they collect.
Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, Nadumo. And I think that kind of relates to what Yusuf was saying, that the ministries and the the regulatory bodies might have that information, and they might not be interested in putting it out there for anyone to download. But as you say, it depends on what you use the data for, etc. Francois had a comment.
Yeah, thanks. Just to respond to Jennifer quickly, Jennifer, I can tell you that I was in Ghana last year, and I met with someone in the Ministry of Education, and my presumption was there wasn't that much data. When I put this to him, he said, no, we've got all the data, because as you say, they do this annual census. So I said, well, can I see the data? And he gave me a CD-ROM with all the data. So one, the data existed. Two, it was digital, but it didn't mean it was accessible. You had to go to Ghana and get a meeting, which wasn't easy, and then have a letter saying that you're authorized to speak to the right person, that you have been endorsed by someone else in government. And then I managed to get a CD-ROM. So it was quite a process, but quite a useful exercise to remind us. I mean, this was after the Herana project. We went through the whole Herana project not even knowing about this data existing. So sometimes it takes going into country and talking to people, and which is not ideal, of course, but at least it tells you what the realities are on the ground.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, we were heavily, I mean, this is why our partnership with AAU is so helpful for us. We wouldn't have been able to do it without having a connection with
it. Yeah. And then, sorry, just to your point, Kasia, about the various sort of granularity of data that's available, particularly by fields of study. So I've sent you the tables that we've published, but of course, there's underlying data to those tables. So there's something for us to remember, that often only the aggregated data or semi-aggregated data, because there are 20 fields of study in there, but they may not be granular enough for your purposes. You want even further levels of specificity, and they exist because otherwise this data wouldn't be possible. So there's something around publication and the degree to which we make granular data available. I mean, of course, there are sometimes issues with personal data. So we have a big problem in South Africa in that regard. The department won't release certain data because there are student records and staff records that have ID numbers and other personal data. And so they're very reluctant to share that. Of course, we say to them, but you can anonymize those. You don't have to, we're not interested in that data. We're interested in other parts, but they use it as an excuse not to share data. So it can be a challenge sometimes to get to the granular level, is my point, even though it exists. And Haran is a culprit in that sense. I mean, we could give you the data, but you'd have to email me, and then I'd have to ask someone, and then he'd have to go dig out his data tables, and then I could email it to you. And that's partly why we try to design this online system, because then all the granular data would be in one place, and then you could run your own reports. But as I said, for various reasons, that just wasn't successful. And so I think it's also useful to track what AAU is doing in that regard, if they're doing multi-country. I know that's just at a pilot stage, but if the accessibility can be there, that'll help researchers, planners, all sorts of people hugely if the granular data is available. Thanks.
Thank you, Francois, for that. Lucy had an example from Kenya on data.
Oh, yes. I just wanted to show you this, which is the data report from the Commission for University Education in Kenya, which has got loads and loads of lovely, quite granular data about the Kenyan higher education sector. But to your point, Francois, it's not available in a digital format at all. So they have the data tables, but it's not in a position for them to share. But interestingly, they would like to do that, and they feel very held back. When I had a conversation there with the head of their research division, he was saying how much they would love for outsiders to come in and do more analytics on their data, that they felt they could learn a lot from analysing that data. But even this is only the second time they've done it. So for them, this is a great step forward. But they're still extremely frustrated by the use they're able to make of that data.
Please, that report was published by the Ministry of Higher Education? Or?
By the Commission for University Education.
Okay.
Yeah.
So thank you. I think that's another kind of example of where maybe in some cases they actually would like to have more eyes on it and help with analysis and manpower. So I think that's a good point. Jörgen wanted to come in.
Yes, I'm just trying. Was searching for a file. Also, I don't know the details of the sector, but I worked more broadly on trying to look at unit cost, different levels of education in Tanzania and Kenya. And usually you also have this kind of medium-term expenditure frameworks. And these are more broad aggregate numbers, but they should be available for both primary, secondary, and tertiary. You know, where you put up the costs and your targets, and so you have some broad aggregate numbers. But I also worked in Tanzania on, we got some information from the government when we were doing a MDG project. And I mean, as somebody said before, I think there is a lot of data available, you know, and also the universities, all universities need to have audited accounts. So there should also be information on that. So I think, you know, it's one good thing is to start digging, but you need to dig by country and country. and get into touch with the ministries or some partners and get you get the data in electronic forms.
Thank you so much. Jörgen Levin is a colleague of mine here at the Nordic Africa Institute, an economist. And I think you have a point there that we also need to be talking to each other. And if we want the data, we could maybe also share how to get it for various countries. But maybe to wrap up this conversation, we have a few more minutes before I'll close the meeting and let you all go. I know AAU talked about their vision for doing some kind of central management system for data collection, and Francois also talked about how that was an effort that didn't work so well for the Hirana project. And I know there are other interests in this. I don't know if anyone wants to just say one or two things about the possibility of centralizing and harmonizing data collection. Of course, we'll not get to a conclusion today, but maybe that is a place where we could at least make sure that it can be as successful as possible. I think you can just jump in at this point. I can't see my chat.
Okay, maybe Kaiser, I'll also mention that we also have an initiative called the African Quality Rating Mechanism under one of our quality assurance projects. And it contains a long questionnaire which universities can complete. And it also provides institutional information, institutional statistics, but largely focuses on universities benchmarking 2 or 3 of their best programs. So the questionnaire has been piloted, has been used before, and this year we will be launching another call around July for universities to participate. So it's a benchmarking exercise, but it will also contain very useful data about staffing and yeah. Maybe I can share the questionnaire and maybe the timelines for that activity, because it's an online survey, sort of. It's an online thing that universities do. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Nodomo. So I think that's helpful. And I said in the chat earlier that if anyone has links to initiatives that they would like to share with other participants so that they are in the know, please share them with me, either in the chat or email me, put together in an email and share with all of you. I think at this point we will wrap up. I'm very happy with the initial conversation. The Nordic Africa Institute is hoping to do more work in research on higher education. There are a number of issues we did not have time to touch upon. Often we talk about the flagship universities or the big state universities, but so many students these days also attend private education, and they often go outside the statistics, or it's not clear how private institutions always report. That's an issue. Another issue is to capture the research done on the continent, as mentioned by Francois, and the ESA project trying to catalog the work done within education, I think, is a good project to visualize what is being done on the continent. That's also something that the Nordic Africa Institute is interested in doing more, the bibliometrics aspect, if you want, of outputs from higher education. We will start with the shared links and resources that people have discussed today, and please feel free to get back to me with other things you're doing, and I'll definitely check in with you all very soon again. At this point, thank you so much for joining us this Friday. I wish you a good weekend. Thanks for today.
Thank you.
Everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
Kaiser. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Kaiser.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, everyone.
Thank you, Michael.